the rate of change that information comes at me, like the rest of you, is just huge. And trying to make sense of it and put it into the context of, well, what am I going to do in the next 12 months, the next 3 years, the next 5 years? It's tough. And so what I want to do is to skim across and go down deep into some areas, but talk about all of the new frameworks that are happening and how that converges onto what I would call a digital operating model, or something that's future-proofed, something that's going to stand the test of time over the next few years. And it was interesting, I was talking to Ian about this in a couple of the earlier events. Some of the things that I'll talk about today, I spoke about, I think it was in 2014 when I did my first emerging frameworks talk. So we were talking about Agile, DevOps, not IT for IT. We were talking about a lot of these things a little while back. And so sometimes it takes a while to get to the mainstream where it actually matters, where it actually makes a difference for your customers or for your business. So it takes a little while, but some of these things are starting to mainstream now. And so it's time to actually start looking at it. Who's got Agile in their organisation somewhere? Yeah? Agile, do you remember when the Agile Manifesto came out? Anybody sort of close enough to that part of the world? It was 2001. Right, so 16 years later, Agile is a thing, right? And, actually, in the software development world, it goes back way earlier. That sort of extreme programming goes back to the 80s. And the idea of prototyping, those things were recognised back when, I can't remember the name of the chap that invented the SDLC. It was an accident, right? He didn't really mean for people to follow that. He was just saying, well, here's a way of doing it in terms of waterfall. I don't necessarily recommend you do that, but anyway, everyone took the waterfall diagram and SDLC became what it is today. Agile's taken 16 years to get to where it is today. We can't take 16 years to go to the next level in terms of our IT operating model and the support model within that. Yeah, we've actually got to giddy up a little bit faster because the pace of change within the business has accelerated quite a lot. So what I wanted to talk about today is the impact of digital on the capabilities for IT. Is there an executive in your organisation that's not talking about digital somewhere, right? Everyone's got a digital strategy. It's, digital 2020, digital 2025, etc., etc. So you're somewhere on your intranet or on your internet site, there will be an annual report or some sort of strategy that'll talk all about the digital version of who you are now, whether you're a university, a utility. So you'll have different sort of flavours of that. If you're a utility, you might be interested in the Internet of Things more than you might be interested in the customer experience and an omni-channel approach, which you might if you're in retail or banking, etc. Yeah, so different verticals or different industries will have different views of this, but everybody's talking digital. And it's starting to expose some problems in our current frameworks and in our mental models. Now, I've been working with iTool since 1998. I joined the original Pink Elephant in Australia. Do you remember the original Pink Elephant when we first sort of started the iTool stuff? Proactive down in Melbourne versus Pink Elephant in Sydney. There was a bit of a thing between Bob Phillipson and Bert Hesketh, the then MD. I took over as MD of Pink Elephant in 2000. Started Lucid IT in 2001. And so I've been heavily involved in these frameworks. I'm CGIT certified with COBIT, iTool Masters in 99, and every certification in iTool sort of since then. Prince 2 trainer, MSP, blah, 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 right? So if you have a look at that sort of LinkedIn profile history, it's got all of the traditional frameworks. More recently, I got excited about DevOps because I could see there's got to be something that's going to join the worlds of Agile, fast cadence, and the ops and our typical sort of 3 monthly releases. How are we going to change the rest of the cadence to the same cadence as Agile? Because apparently the business wants that. So I got excited about DevOps, and then I got excited about IT for IT because it provided a reference architecture to show value from ideation all the way through to production. Yeah, and the various iterations or releases something might go through. So IT for IT has created a backbone for a lot of this stuff. So got excited about that too, because it all informs what I would call the operating model for the future. I call it digital operating model just because that's cool, but it's just an IT operating model. I'll talk a little bit about some of the, the noise that we get in the market from some of the research organisations. We don't have to go bimodal, just to put that out there, and I'll talk about some of the reasons why. The other thing that's coming at us is bots and AI. You're seeing there's a bit of a spat between Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk at the moment. So Facebook and Tesla are duking it out over the future of robotics and whether or not AI is a good or bad thing. Yeah, everyone's seen a couple of dystopian movies and gone, well, you know, this is apparently what's going to happen in the future. Terminators are going to take over and rewrite history. So there's a little bit of fear and uncertainty around bots and AI. What will it do to the workforce, et cetera, et cetera. So it's worthwhile having a bit of a look at that. And I guess as service management professionals, who here's got an ITIL certification of some sort? Yeah, we've all been around the block on that. So as service management professionals, what does this mean to us, and how might we leverage those skills more broadly in the future? And I've been very encouraged in this space because as an older ITIL guy that's been around the block with this sort of stuff, I actually look at business problems more often these days than I used to, and I look at these things that are actually services that the business delivers out of HR, facilities, property management. There's all these services that are happening in the business, and they don't understand notifications, statuses, service levels, how to do continuous improvement on a service, that sort of stuff. Things that we've learned about. Sometimes we find it difficult to put into practice, but we actually know. We understand the theory of that, and we look at these business problems and go, actually, I know how to solve that. I've got to be a bit careful I don't call it ITIL, because you're not very interested in the words of, or that taxonomy of all of that stuff over there. But knowing service management is a very, very useful skill for the business. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end. Okay, so a disclaimer. We're looking into the not too distant future. This is not written yet, some of the stuff. The convergence of these things and what to do with them, it's kind of hard. I mean, if you're looking at this from a business perspective, well, it's happening already, right? So the bots and AI and all of those things are actually happening. So that's not something that's, you don't have to prevaricate about that, it's happening. So what does that mean for IT is more the question, and nobody's written about that. ITIL's not been updated, ISO 20000's not been, or I'll talk a little bit more about that. So we're actually crystal ball gazing a little bit and using our smarts as a group, and we'll talk about it a little bit more over a drink later on, because I've got so many concepts to get through, we can't sort of have an open discussion too much. But we're crystal ball gazing, and there are very few organisations that got the time to lift their heads up and go, I wonder if that thing might be useful or not, you know, and then how do I bring that into my plan for the next 12 months, and how do I convince, because it's always hard from ITSM and support to go upstream to strategy and architecture and say, you know what, we actually should be thinking about this more broadly from an architectural perspective, how all our tools fit together, how the digital portfolio works with the traditional portfolios, and how we need to reinvent our support models. Hard to get engaged with the rest of IT sometimes to get them thinking in a similar sort of way. But we can see it coming, yeah? Who's using some sort of chat now, right? So I brought this up, I think I did social IT about 3 years ago, 2 years ago, something like that in this room, same room. I think there was one person doing it, I think from Deloitte, right, at the time. Yeah, and Deloitte are always sort of doing the digital thing. They've sort of been out there. So all of a sudden, everybody's working on those things, yeah? It's baked into the tool. Who's got a portal of some sort? A level 0, yeah? So you didn't have that. That's actually not in the ITIL books from memory, yeah? Because the ITIL books that describe the service desk and the support models were actually written in the 1980s. The practices were written in the 1980s from ICL, right, back in the UK, and that was adopted by UK government, got published and all of that sort of stuff. So there are very few organisations that are looking that far forward, but we're seeing some of this sort of come through the tools, and you know, there's various influences where we start to adopt these things, but we don't actually have the best practices to guide us. So some of these frameworks that we've got are legacy. Some of the frameworks of the future feel a little bit out of reach. How do we resolve that tension? You know, how do we create something that's a nice next step for our organisation? And also, let's not beat ourselves up too much. Yeah. Also, not be too forgiving of not doing anything. But what I'm saying is, we are where we are, and there's lots of reasons for being where we are. Arguing to stay there is not the best idea, but also accepting that we are where we are for lots of good reasons. That's an important sort of benchmark to say, okay, here's all the reasons how we got to where we are, and here's how we're going to use where we are as a baseline for moving forward. So we have to think on these things together and synthesise the future a little bit. Yeah. So I've done a little bit of the synthesis for you, because that's kind of what I do. I enjoy that. So I'll bring some of these things together, and then we can discuss it over a drink, you know, between 3 and 5, or I'm not sure what time the plane leaves. So my feeling is that there's been a real quickening on the business side, you know, and everybody talks about Uber, and there's various different business models. Even Uber is in danger of being, at least there's a lot of Me Too around Uber. I was in San Francisco for a conference in January. We're standing outside the dinner venue looking to go somewhere. People pulling out the mobile phones. We'll go to this club. There's an Uber 2 blocks away, but there's a Waze, no, not Waze, Lyft, Lyft, a competitor, yet there's a closer Lyft. Press the button and it's a 7-seater. All of us could go to the club together. We're not right? That's real-time stuff going on. Uber just got disrupted because there was a better, faster, cheaper version, somebody closer, right? And they would have gone, whoa, what just happened there? We're the ones that disrupt others. So this is happening all across the industry, the business world, and there's all of these different things that are coming out. And so I find it telling that whilst IBM is downsizing quite a bit globally, they've got 1,000 people working in these spaces, on research and development, on the future of technology, automation, big data, artificial intelligence, those sorts of things. When I say biggish data, it doesn't have to be big like Australian Bureau of Statistics big, right, for it to be useful. What's in your logs is biggish data in the end. There's lots of good data that's in your own organisation. And so all of this research results in things, portals, robots, machine learning, bots, all of that sort of stuff, and a bunch of new frameworks and tools that are coming at us. And so I'm not going to talk too much about scaled agile today. We could, if you like, later on, but we've got a bunch of new frameworks coming at us and new tools all over the place. And what I'd suggest we're doing is we're converging on what I would hope to, I hope that we could say, well, it's actually a digital operating model, and we can tell the business, yes, we're on the same journey that you're on. You're on a digital journey, and we're doing that with our IT as well. So it's not such a big deal to do support from a mobile, right? Now, go back 2 years ago, getting a mobile version of the client-server app that you're on, that was a big deal. Yeah, I was actually with one of our clients, a little consult in this space, by the way. I've got it, so it's not just me out doing presentations and education. The team is we do change. We do transformation around a lot of different things. So I'm seeing our customers heading in this direction, and we're trying to accelerate that process for them. So our big challenges. Make iTool great again. I don't know if you follow Donald Trump. iTool is good, right? But it's a little bit of a 1980s problem, and some of the mental models from that are good, but they're not necessarily the answer. So the other thing is local optimization. Who's trying to get a fixed on first of 80% or so? If you manage to achieve that, that could be really bad for the system. But you don't necessarily know. 80% of what? Some of these things should be fixed on first and some shouldn't. It will serve the service better to have some things flow through to a second, third level because it's early in its life cycle, needs the feedback. Yeah? And so the distribution of calls against these different services is something that's really interesting to look at and say, well, how should our first level function be supporting the overall business goal as opposed to its own goal of being super efficient at getting as many fixing as many on first as possible. Yeah, it's in danger of being a local optimization if you're not aware of the overall system and the services within that. So that's something that we've got to keep our eyes on. The other challenge is we've got to evolve fast enough to solve the emerging challenges. Now, historically, I've been involved in sort of Deming-based plan, do, check, act cycles, yeah? And we've all done the course, it's in the iTool course. It's pretty much in any quality management course, there's some sort of feedback cycle. What sort of cycle do you think that is in terms of time? How long is that cycle? A plan, do, check, act cycle. Pick a process, incident management. How often should we be doing the continuous improvement on that? Interesting question, right? You don't immediately know an answer to that. You're wondering what he's looking for. Now, I've often seen this stuff in business planning. Executive team getting together and looking at the priorities. We should work on incident management. We haven't done anything on incident management for a year, right? That's a bit sad, isn't it? Because we're doing management reporting, This is how many we had, trending up, trending down. These are the amount of resources we need to solve the problem. But PDCA has historically been a little bit nebulous. Well, should we do it on an annual basis? Should we do it on a monthly basis? Should we do it on a weekly basis? Now, if you're talking agile, how often do you do retros? It's kind of weekly. You look at the work you did that week or within that sprint of 2 weeks and you say, how can we improve what we're doing? If you look at DevOps or continuous delivery, you try to do the feedback in line with the production of the release. Oh, look, there's some errors in the release. Can't let those through. Let's jump on those and not only fix the error, but fix the why upstream. How do we create those defects? And nice that we trap them, but let's get to the root cause and resolve the procedural or tool issue that's causing that. So our feedback loops have to be faster. And our emerging challenges, you know, like the Internet of Things, it's crashing in. A lot of these things are crashing in. And so it can't be 3 years. It can't be a strategic initiative that takes us 5 years to get to. So some of these things we've got to do some small, quick initiatives to get there a little bit faster. And fragmentation of tools, portfolios and delivery models. There's a lot of different things going on, including our sourcing model, which results in things like SIAM and how does SIAM work in this digital world where everything's going fast. How do I assemble a new service out of all of these different suppliers? They're on different contracts and processes and tools. So a lot of challenges we have there. And of course, in terms of delivery models, software as a service will be the norm for corporate systems and many applications from the line of business. Who's on Office 365 by now? Yeah, or on the way? Yeah. There's an inevitability to that, isn't there? Yeah, there's an inevitability. So what that drives then, though, is access to Azure. And what I'm seeing with some of our customers is they're porting their traditional workloads off the tin and putting it into Azure. I wouldn't have thought that, right? 12 months ago, I wouldn't have thought that people would do that. But they've solved the identity and access management problem. They're quite comfortable with Azure compared to AWS, different skill set, bit difficult. Okay, we're in the Microsoft world, we feel more comfortable. So we're seeing a lot of stuff already going over there. So that's a public infrastructure as a service thing. So who doesn't have some sort of cloud by now? Who doesn't have AWS or Azure or Google somewhere? It'll be in a dev environment. Your developers will be standing up their dev environments in AWS, Azure, etc. So this wasn't a thing 5 years ago, was it? In fact, even 2 years ago. Yeah. So if you look at the rapid acceleration in those trajectories, I remember I used to work for UXC. My last business, Lucid IT, was sold into UXC in 2008. And I remember talking to the CIO Advisory Council of UXC at the time about cloud. The imminence of cloud, the fact that it's going to come and disrupt your world. And there was a lot of over my dead body sort of conversation over drinks, and I'm going, oh, guys, really, this is not about you. This is an inevitable trajectory. So just relax a little bit, let it in because it's coming, right? And yes, all of your objections are reasonable. They will be solved because the economics and the business agility will solve those problems. Yeah, they're small objections, relatively speaking, to the value proposition of the stuff that's coming at you. So all of this is happening. Eventually, the digital portfolios, there's a lot of that will be bespoke, continuous delivery product. The things that are your competitive advantage, a lot of it you'll continue to do yourself in the line of business, and there will be a lot of platforms in there. And the expectation is that they will be like Netflix, continuously operating. Yeah. Why would I have to worry about changes and all of that sort of stuff taking my systems down? Who does that anymore, right? That would be the expectation. Give it a couple of years, that's the expectation. Because we all use Netflix at home or something like that. Facebook, when was the last time you tried to log on to Facebook and it wasn't there? I don't remember that ever happening, to be honest. And I've been on Facebook a while. I don't remember it ever happening. It's happened a couple of times with Google. It's happened a couple of times with Amazon in their IaaS cloud-based services, but that was because of poor architecture. That when Amazon went down, Netflix didn't go down because it was architected differently. They tested for all of those things that could possibly go wrong architecturally, and so when Amazon goes down on the east coast of North America, Netflix is okay because they're a global architecture, right? So this 24/7 continuous operations mode is what the expectation of the business will be. So a lot of challenges in front of us. The portfolio's changing, the business expectations are changing, the frameworks, well, we've got to have a good look at those and see what the newer frameworks have got to offer us. But before we disappear off into the future too much, let's have a look at where are we now. And some of the things that Ian mentioned before from the latest HDI stats are worthwhile having a look at. The frameworks that are in use, CMM, COBIT, HDI, ISO, etc. So all of those, you can read those yourself. ITIL, KCS are among the highest of the currently use it, only 22% for KCS, only 50% for ITIL. Planning to use it. We're talking about 2017, actually 2016, these numbers. We're planning to use ITIL 2017. Anyway, how well are all these things working together? Now, this is a little bit North American. If you looked at the rest of the world, the ITIL number would be higher. In speaking with Ian, typically the HDI reports are pretty close to what we see in Australia, but I'd suggest ITIL had one of those not invented here problems when it went into North America and took a little while longer to get established. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're a little bit behind in some areas. But there's a lot going on here, and I think that's a challenge in itself. And I can't tell you how much eye rolling goes on for me when people say, should I do ITIL, should I do COBIT, should I do ISO 20000, should I do DevOps, should I do this, should I do that? I go, well, yes to all of the above. There are lots of great principles in there. Let's talk about your operating model requirements. What is your business context? How are your lines of business organised? What's your supply chain look like? Who are the suppliers? What's the cadence of change in your industry? All of these things are important before we start thinking about the how, because we've got to understand what problem we're solving first. And a lot of what happens is we see a bright, shiny new thing, and we go over there and say, well, let's kick the tires and see if that's the silver bullet I've always been looking for. Yeah? And same with the tools. So we've got a plethora of different tool requirements or capabilities that we're looking for from the tools market. Yeah, they seem to be breeding. Lots of point solutions and a lot of sort of platforms these days that do a lot of these things, but few that do everything really well in an integrated way. So that's one of our challenges, is that everybody's going to be knocking on the door saying, our tool will do all of the above and go with us. It's a cloud version. It's going to be a great thing. But we've still got to have our own operating model in mind to compare the tool requirements against what it is that the people are offering us. We'll talk about IT for IT and its reference architecture later. Very helpful. Really, really pleased with this one. Factors motivating technology implementations and upgrades. We want to improve the customer experience, continual process improvement. So we're investing to try and solve the right problem. Very, very pleased with that. Firstly, the what we're trying to improve, the customer experience, and continual process improvement is a bit of how. You know, so there's a relationship between those two things that I think is quite, it's quite good to see. So I'm very pleased with that. The customer being the end focus. And look, I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The balance between customer experience management versus service management. Where should we be putting our attention? And ITIL, when the V3 books came out in May 2007, sorry, new processes like transition planning and support came out, or new best practices were actually published maybe for the first time. Not making a lot of an impact. If I went to a CIO, heads of strategy and architecture, and asked, how's the service strategy book serving you from ITIL? I think they would go, huh? Or one of the two, right? If they know about it, they'd go, yeah, I don't really know what that book was all about. It looked like it was written, you know, by HP for themselves or something like that, because I don't see enterprise IT in the service strategy book. I was the one of the original reviewers of the service strategy book before it came out in 2007. And I read it and went, there's lots of good theory in there, but I'm not sure that it's solving the right problem, because ITIL is written for enterprise IT folks, not type 1 outsourced providers, which that book is focused on. Yeah, still a problem. It was rewritten by David Cannon for the 2011 release, and it still didn't solve the problem because it wasn't helping folks like you that have got enterprise IT concerns, as opposed to outsourcers which have different commercial concerns and markets and all of those sorts of things to think about. So you need an MBA to read that book. Hence you won't see a lot of those things getting done in organisations, which is a shame. because they're all coupled in some way. They all need to relate. So you shouldn't be doing a strategy that doesn't think of the service management capability. Yeah. So we've got a bit of a disconnect there in the way it's been delivered out to the market in that service strategy book. Continual service improvement doesn't really help either. But of course we've got incident, knowledge, change, problem as processes that are largely well understood, not necessarily greatly executed. I think you'd all agree that problem management's been a poor relation since day one. I feel a bit responsible for that. Back in the day we used to say, do incident management first, measure for 3 or 4 months, see what the data is, and then proactively start to raise problem records and blah blah blah. So it would be an after the fact sort of thing. That's problematic. In the world of lean or DevOps, you wouldn't do that ever. You wouldn't say, oh, we'll get to the defects later. We want to understand why things are going wrong and get to them at a root cause level. So some of the things we've done in ITIL seemed like they were a good idea at the time, but we actually had a couple of own goals. But in my view, I'll be optimistic about it. All great changes are preceded by chaos, and it feels like we've had a fair bit of that over the last 20 years or so. Maybe we're about to break through. And I think the thing that I would be suggesting to people is part of that breakthrough is seeing IT as one overall connected system, not seeing it as operations, the DevOps problem, or ITSM and applications, or strategy, or suppliers and customers. It's all one big system that's connected together. Yeah? And if you see that, it makes sense of a lot of the decisions that you need to make. So that's hopefully where we're going to head in this next iteration. I think IT for IT's got a little bit to do with that. Yeah? It's got a role to play in seeing these things together. So let's have a little bit of a dive in on the digital problem, or even just the concept of it. Now this book from Gartner called The Digital Edge has been around for about 5 years. I saw Mark McDonald present this at Gartner Symposium probably 5 years ago. And I thought it was a good definition at the time. A digital business creates value and revenue from digital assets. So it's beyond process automation. It's more all of the things you can do when you converge technologies together and say, well, now we've got mobile, Wi-Fi, big data, IoT, bots and intelligent automation. What can I do with that? As opposed to looking at these things in isolation. How might we disrupt ourselves in the way we do support, etc.? And you can see people doing those sorts of things in other industries. Not so much in IT yet, but we'll get there. Once upon a time we had no chat, we had no portals, we had none of those things either. So we're not too bad in the IT space at reinventing ourselves. Just in case you didn't think digital and customer experience were... Anybody familiar with Mary Meeker before I go on? Mary puts out an annual report on internet trends, what's going on in the world of digital these days. And it's about 350 slides. She puts me to shame. She does 350 slides in about 50 minutes, right? And she talks in this sort of droll accent and just bang, bang, bang. But if you search Mary Meeker, you'll find lots of interesting stuff. And she updates year on year, so there's nice trends that she's aware of. So what do people value? Easier access to online support channels, faster agent response times, consistent customer experience across channels, faster access to live support. Now this is the customer experience people are looking for in retail, banking and all those sorts of things, and you're looking for this yourself, aren't you? Yeah? When you're booking an airline ticket, when you're trying to do a mobile transaction, etc., you're looking for these things. You want it to be easy for you to transact, to do business, and when things go wrong, you want a good support experience. And that's why, in some respects, a lot of retailers should fear Amazon coming to Australia, because all they care about is customer experience and making money and the tension of those two things, right? But they know the good customer experience alters buyer behaviour. Nobody thinks twice about buying something from Amazon, do you? Anybody not bought anything from Amazon? Yeah? You will. They're coming. I mean, when they've got a retail presence like bricks and mortar, that's going to make even more of a difference. I buy from Amazon a lot of the time because it'll be late at night and I'll come across a link on YouTube. I want to buy a book and I'll pick up the audio book or I'll pick up the Kindle book for my iPad. So I've got this rhythm of staying in touch with things via using their services. So we know that the retailers are worried about that. The Australian retailers are worried about how can I compete with somebody that delivers things faster, gives a great customer experience, a bit cheaper in most respects, etc., etc. It puts a lot of pressure on the smaller organisations that don't have any specific reason for being. If you're a generalist retailer, just aggregating a bunch of other people's stuff, putting it as shop front, yeah, if you're just doing that, where's your value add? Well, it's your ability to buy stuff cheaper and put it in a shop front. I reckon Amazon's going to be pretty good at that, yeah? And they've got the rest of the supply chain sorted out in a way that Myers, David Jones, Harvey Norman, etc. are going to struggle to keep up with because they haven't been relentlessly pursuing improvement, which is what these guys do. But even in our government, the Digital Technology Agency, in federal government, which we would think is a lagging sort of body in terms of practices, they're really pressing hard because there's a lot of outcomes they can get in terms of better service for citizens and also cheaper services, and it's just the general expectations of the public are that the government would head in this direction. But there's so much cost embedded in a lot of the ways that government does business at the moment that the digital has a lot to offer. And some organisations are wearing this on their sleeve. This is another one from Mary Meeker. Organisations are saying the secret to our low rates, we're digital. This is why we're cheaper. Yeah, it's not that we give you worse insurance. Our insurance is the same as everybody else's. Check our prices, etc., etc. Well, we're a little bit cheaper because we're digital, yeah, but we give you the same sort of product. And by the way, direct feedback to the CEO. Is there anybody else that follows Donald Trump's Twitter feed, or is it just me? I feel like I'm directly connected to the most powerful politician in the free world, right? It's just bizarre that in this day and age you can directly follow and answer. He's not going to get engaged in a conversation because he doesn't have a conversation with anybody, I don't think, on their terms at least. But Elon Musk is a really interesting one because he's a go-ahead sort of thinker. He actually interacts with people. So the world is democratising in that regard, is that you can reach people in a way that you couldn't once upon a time, and you can give feedback. Now, of course, that CEO may or may not directly monitor that feed, but the escalations, if they're important enough, we're probably going to get there because this is so associated with their brand. They put it out there, and they've really got to back that up. Another thing that I think is worth a look at is that a lot of our expectations are that the digital experience will be all here. Digital is all about the customer experience, client insights, top line growth, client touch points, those sorts of things. I developed this all about 3 years ago, actually, yeah, about 4 years ago, based on some work from MIT. And I thought this was useful to show, okay, well, we're seeing some here, but people innovation, knowledge management, worker enablement, virtual teams, operational processes, and this is where the Internet of Things kicks in. We'll see a lot of disruption coming in from that space, and then the business models, where somebody says, well, I'm going to have to Uber my own services. Yeah, so instead of doing a physical-based model, I'm going to have a streaming service for that these days. And you can see that Telstra has, not only has got its Foxtel, but it's got Foxtel Go now, so that you've basically got a Netflix on your phone or your tablet when you're travelling around. So some traditional organisations have also started to reinvent their own business models to keep up with those disruptive business models that are coming at them. So we'll see more and more of that. Okay, so some factoids on Internet of Things. Just a quick check. Anybody working on an Internet of Things project or have one working in their domain at the moment? Not yet? When we did the event in Canberra last week, we actually had some people from Telstra that were running their Internet of Things platform. So of course, if you've got internet, if you've got things out there, they're typically connected via some sort of SIM. So you've got a 4G SIM there that's connecting with Telstra's network, and so they've organised a platform to aggregate all of the traffic from those things and then port that across your organisation and intersect that with your service management tools, if that's the right thing to do, or into your operations function. So they've developed a platform for that. So it's quite an emergent but serious discipline that's coming at us. So Gartner's been tracking it for 5 years already. 8.4 billion things in 2017, and we're expecting 20.4 billion by 2020. Now on the domestic front, there's a lot of growth in wearables, set-top boxes, Apple TV, those sorts of things. But it's happening in every vertical. In a hospital, any facilities-centric organisation, the franchises, the fast food franchises, those sorts of organisations. So the Internet of Things, mining, autonomous driving, trucks, there's all sorts of stuff coming at us, that's going to be providing a lot of information to us. So those things require support. They're effectively another persona that we need to deal with. And they're not VIPs. They're not going to yell louder than everything else. They could be treated as noise, but they could be actually involved in very key parts of our business processes. And a McKinsey report that came out very recently said 40% of organisations are expecting that Internet of Things will be pivotal to service operations. And guess what? We're all connected to service operations of our businesses, Doesn't matter what industry we're in. IT services are connected to the business services that are being offered out there. And so if the business will be thinking about how they can leverage Internet of Things to make their service better, faster and cheaper. So manufacturing use cases are fairly straightforward, but the service operations use cases are perhaps require a little bit more thought. So it's coming, right? As I say, you may not have it now, or it may not be operating in your particular vertical industry now, but it will at some point. So what do we need to do about that? So these things are connecting to enterprise systems in some way. If you are a utility or a telco, these things are connecting back to billing systems and all sorts of other systems. So we need to understand what traffic they're creating, how those transactions are coming through to IT, and what the support model is going to look like for that when you don't get the call or you don't have a chat session with it. So how do we organise that? And also when we're making a change, for example, that's going to impact services, and we need to put together a change request, we also have to think about these things. What is the potential downstream or knock-on effect of taking out the network for a period of time? Taking a critical system down for a change. So where are these devices? How are they going to connect and present their status to us? So the high volume of data is one of the reasons why the machine learning and artificial intelligence are going to become much more prevalent and important for us, because we cannot parse all of this data out on a transaction by transaction basis. We've got to be looking for patterns. We've got to be looking for the unexpected things, detect the anomalies, and then look into those anomalies. Now some of those could be looked into through, again, another piece of technology, artificial intelligence. If these things happen, react like this. Add this capacity, reroute this traffic. Okay, so that's intelligent automation based on patterns that we're seeing. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we can use these things in the incident life cycle a little bit later on. So that's what's coming at us. So how are our traditional frameworks reacting to that? So I don't like to be hard on XaaS or any particular framework's body, but trying to sell things from the 1990s as if they're new, and certifications for that sort of stuff as being the next thing you want to do, right? Yes, if you haven't got a certification that sort of gives you confidence as a practitioner, maybe there's some certifications you want to pick up, but you also want to lift your sights up and say, well, what's coming at us in the future? It's not going to be, I know the ITIL books reasonably well. You know, for 2011, I was a cross-functional reviewer. I had to review all of the books and look at the consistencies and inconsistencies as you go across the life cycle from strategy all the way to continuous service improvement. There were issues in 2011 in the connective tissue between all of those things and them working together as a system. Fundamentally, they were still based on books from the 1990s, which were based on practices from bureau computing from ICL in the late 1980s. Yeah? And we're still trying to put that forward as the best practice. So that's a little bit of a challenge. And I remember I went to the ServiceNow Global Conference in Vegas in 2015, and Netflix was presenting. ServiceNow and Netflix, I thought, wow, Netflix, ServiceNow, they must have solved the whole thing by now. You know, they've got everything working together in the way that, you know, Service Desk works with operations and all that sort of stuff. Service Desk's hardly connected to operations at all. They were just using it for ticketing. Yeah, they were just taking calls, logging tickets, and occasionally passing them upstream. But Netflix is not waiting around for the Service Desk to pass information to them, because they're streaming video globally 24/7 to hundreds of millions of people probably by now. Is it hundreds? Facebook's over a billion. I don't know, Netflix must be in tens of millions, if not 100 plus. It's huge. So you can't resolve that sort of support requirement for incident management via that sort of model. Of course, they're only using it for customer complaints and that sort of stuff. The real heart of service management in those organisations is actually operations. They're monitoring everything, yeah? And they know that things are going wrong before the customer does. So, and it's their job as site reliability engineers, and that's what they call them. We'll talk about that a little bit later. They don't want calls about the support problem. That's the last thing they want, yeah? They want to be pushing notifications out. Sorry, we're experiencing difficulties in your region. We expect to be back up in 15 minutes. Is that right, Ops? Yeah, 15 minutes, we're on it. So it's a very different sort of model, pushing notifications upstream rather than saying Service Desk is the first point of entry for everything and runs the incident, yeah, which is kind of the mental model that we have from ITIL. So that's interesting. So ITIL, great set of principles, not sufficient, not evolving. And to be a bit harsh, when I read white papers written by XaaS, but not just XaaS, there are others that are guilty of the same thing. They know that it's a topic that somebody should be saying something about, so somebody writes something generic that can't be wrong, doesn't have any new practices in it, but hey, at least we're talking about DevOps, at least we're talking about IoT or whatever it is, right? Now, as a practitioner, I read that stuff and go, you're not saying anything there that you couldn't find in a quick web search. And you're not talking about what you're going to do in the publications that you currently have stewardship over to actually adapt to those concepts and, you know, bring them in to the community and publish that out to practitioners. So it's a bit of a, I don't know, it's a useful thing in bringing the visibility of these concepts, but it doesn't solve the problem for anybody. That's the challenge. COBIT 5, anybody a COBIT person here? Done a COBIT training? It's as useful as it ever was, right? And there's a double-edged sword there, of course. It's always been a bit useful, and it's never going to be much more useful than that. 44 processes, 4 phases of a life cycle, 3 governance processes that sit on top of it based on ISO 38500. It's a big monolithic thing that's awesome for auditors as a framework. It's not a bad basis for an operating model. Plan, build, run, monitor. You've got some governance on the top. You've got life cycle phases all connected together, KPIs, controls, risk management. It's not bad, but it's not an operating model. It's just a big monolithic set of controls that they've organised quite nicely. So, useful for the auditors, good common language. It speaks the language of ITIL. Version 4 back in the early 2000s didn't speak the language of ITIL. Version 5, which has come out more than 10 years ago, version 5 speaks the language of ITIL, and it's useful. ISO 20000, last updated in 2011. Supposed to be a 5-year cycle, should have come out last year, still under redevelopment. But you don't expect those practices, any of them. Same with Sophia. Anybody using Sophia? Skills Framework for the Information Age? Pretty cool stuff. You know, we've been using it with our customers to do the position descriptions and all that. It's a good thing, but it's always after the fact. Best practices are typically after the fact. This is what most organisations seem to be doing now. It's good practice. Let's write that down, publish it out, make it part of a certification. But it's not solving tomorrow's problem. That's the challenge with these things. So, anybody come across the concept of bimodal? Any of your executives talking about bimodal? Yeah. So Gartner has been pushing this for must be 3 or 4 years by now, at least. So they're saying that there's 2 teams. To solve all of these problems we're talking about, we just break ourselves into 2 teams. We've got a Mode 1 team, cool, funky team that gets stuff done. Sorry, that's Mode 2. Mode 2 are handling the systems of innovation and predominantly are working fast-paced in the digital portfolio. Mode 1 is our legacy team, running a legacy portfolio. And so Gartner came up with this pace layering idea, saying we have systems of innovation, systems of differentiation, typically in the business units, and systems of record, our finances, payroll, those sorts of things that are slower moving and more legacy in feel. The thing is, the nonsense if you say that, well, we'll break the thing into 2 and we'll say, well, I have our cool funky stuff managed by these people, and those people over there will manage that stuff. Actually, all of this is connected together. So my mobile app is connected to my system of differentiation, which might be like a CRM, which is connected to a system of record because I do my order to cash. I've got my other core business processes involved with that. These are all being managed end-to-end as one service, yeah? And so we can't really chop off the head and put it over there and put the body over there and say, well, they can be managed by different teams with different processes and tools. That's the problem with the Mode 1, Mode 2 idea. Yeah, and it reminds me a little bit, and I reckon there's probably a few people here that are old enough to have been around for Y2K. Yeah, right. There's a few of us. Yeah, and you know the world was falling. You know the final days, Armageddon. I admit, well, I went to sleep that night. It's my birthday too, December 31st. So it's always a bit weird. I mightn't have been so sober at the time. Oh, the world's ending. A few more beers, and e-commerce was happening at the same time. Yeah, and so we set up e-commerce departments. Yeah, I don't know if you saw that, but all the big banks, lots of organisations set up their e-commerce business unit as a separate thing, separate systems, web development, get outsourcers to do, or external parties to do all of that. And firstly, that was a bit of a dud. Gave us a bad reputation for a number of years because of the scaremongering and all that sort of stuff. A lot of software salespeople were really pushing the ERPs in at that point. So we were a bit on the nose as IT for a while. And e-commerce, within the next 5 years or so, all came back into the centre. Yeah? So e-commerce became normal IT again. Or sometimes they might be within a specific line of business. So you might have e-commerce sitting within a line of business, but supported centrally. So our challenge is, how do we change faster and what does the destination look like? That's really what we've got to figure out. Otherwise, this stuff happens again. In fact, it's already happened, hasn't it? Who's got a digital business unit or a digital team that's off doing its own thing? Yeah? And we're trying to catch up with them and get them to follow the process and controls and security and all of that sort of stuff. Buggers have got off the reservation again while we weren't looking. Because the business said you can, right? Don't go talk to those guys over there, they're too slow. We need to, get you guys a big giddy up. So just, we'll take the risk, we'll take care of it. And even traditional organisations like Aussie Post, right? My colleague Andrew Wedding at the back was working at Post back in fact, until fairly recently. And so Aussie Post set up a digital team, digital delivery centre, I think, under Cam Goff. 100 or so developers. It's much more than that now. It's been transferred out of IT, in fact. But I asked Cameron Goff, I said, so Cam, how do you interact with enterprise IT? He said, not so much. Not so much. We do most of our stuff self-service on AWS, using the Spotify model and all of this, new age funky stuff. Because, again, so much overhead of doing business with enterprise IT that they couldn't really afford that. Yeah. But, ultimately, they'll all come back again because they're all going to suffer the same problem when they want to interact with other systems and when they want to scale and become real. When revenue gets to a certain point, compliance means that you have to treat it in a certain way. Yeah, you can't be insecure, just fast and loose, cowboy type activity all over the marketplace. It's the company's brand that you're carrying. in those transactions. So, okay. Now, you'll guess that I'm a bit of a fanboy of two of the CEOs in the world at the moment. Jobs has been, he's left us a little while ago now, so I'm kind of, moving on. But we've got Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, probably as my two favourite thinkers these days. Elon Musk, I'll talk about here and there as we go through. But Jeff Bezos impresses a lot with his insight into things like this. So, a lot of our process becomes a proxy for value. We get used to, well, we can't be wrong because we're following the ITIL book. And the ITIL book says do this, we do this, we can't be wrong. We do the change process the way that ITIL does it. We do the project management the way that Prince 2 says. We do our governance the way that COBIT says. We can't be wrong. Yeah? But what Bezos says is those things are only proxies for managing the customer experience, for managing risk, for managing whatever it is. The real thing is, how does the customer feel at the end of that? Oh, but we followed the process. No. How does the customer feel at the end of that? Did we make the papers because of a security breach? We followed the process. No. We made the papers because of a security breach. So stop arguing for those things that are actually proxies for solving the problem. They are just processes. They're often orthodoxy, right? Can't be wrong for buying IBM. Back in the day. Can't be wrong if you follow ITIL. The auditors, they passed us. Yes, but the auditors don't know much in the end. They only know how to follow the bouncing ball and tick off the controls that they're looking for, yeah? They're not managing risk for you. That's an exercise in futility. You have to manage risk for yourself. Oh, once upon a time, once a year, the auditors come to our organisation, they tick the boxes, we're safe. Yeah, it's not how it works, is it? So audit is just a checks and balances type thing to make the board feel like that there's some sort of level of governance in the organisation. We've got to make sure that we're not using our frameworks and processes to convince ourselves that we're doing a great job. And that's why when organisations ask me these days to do an ITIL assessment and to give them a CMMI level, I say, if you need that, it'll be in the appendix. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at ITSM capability, its fitness for purpose now, and its fitness for purpose for the future. And also, where does it fit in your overall operating model? In the life cycle from what the architects are dreaming up through to what operations has to run and what the customer is experiencing every day. Yeah? So ITSM capability is what the important thing is, not the ITIL processes themselves. They're an indicator that they might be kind of useful. If they're at level 3 or above, okay, you might be under some sort of level of control. Are you efficient? Are you serving the customer well? Are you delivering value? Not so sure. There are other things you need to look for there. Okay. Switch gears again to DevOps. Anybody doing DevOps in their organisation already? Yeah? Doing some? All right. Yeah, we've declared a bit of DevOps going on. Yeah. My favourite example of that is Commonwealth Bank. I think the CIO's name's David Whiting. Sure, he's a very intelligent man, but like all executives, they fall in love with a book, they read it on a plane, and then they say to all of their direct reports, you're all getting a copy of this book, we're all in on DevOps. Yeah, well, I think you might be getting ahead of yourself there. Let's just define the problem a little bit first. Why would we do DevOps, and how would we do DevOps? They're actually pretty challenging questions. The why actually is getting easier, because lots of people are being successful with it, and we're learning from what we would call the unicorns. So people like Amazon, Facebook, Google, Netflix, those sorts of organisations are leading the way because it just makes sense for them. They can't take 5 years to roll out an IT service management strategy and roadmap and all of that sort of stuff. They've got operations to run, customers to serve, and they've got to do it now. They've got very, very fast feedback loops as a result. So the unicorns are leading the way in the DevOps world because it kind of made sense. And when you're a small software development team, of course it's all together. Dev and ops are together by nature. In fact, a lot of the time, dev is doing the ops, right? It's just natural because you're not going to pay to have an ops team when you're in startup mode. You don't have the money. And so you self-serve as much as you can. You keep things as cheap as possible till you find out you've got a value proposition, and then you scale it with your customer base. That's what you do. So that's how all of these have emerged. These days we talk about the horses as being the enterprise. So the organisations that you work for, where you've got a significant IT organisation and you've got digital programs going on, you've already got Agile, yeah, and you're trying to figure out, well, what can I learn from the unicorns? What's going to make sense for us to adopt as practices so that we can accelerate along with our business to help it achieve its competitive goals? And then, of course, we have the donkeys. And we've still got donkeys in every different aspect of different practices, right? Where we're trying to pull them forward into the future. You know you need it, right? So I've got a couple of donkeys at home. I can definitely attest to that sort of behaviour. And the goats. Goats are a thing in DevOps, and I found it quite amusing and a little strange when I first saw it. But you'll see that I've kind of warmed to the idea. The goat is the curious nature that you follow your way into things that you're interested in. You can't tell a goat not to go and climb up the hill to see what's on top. They'll just go. Apparently they'll climb trees as well. If they're interested, they'll find a way. And in the DevOps community, we talk about goats because they're the ones that, despite the orthodoxy of the organisation, they see a problem and go, oh, look at that. That's a problem. Oh, look. There's some DevOpsy type stuff. That's what people, I might go along to a meetup and find out what that's about, or read this book, go back and try something with some open source software in an experiment on an AWS server, or 2 or 10, because I can. That's what goats do, right? So that's the metaphor of the goat in the DevOps world, is that they don't have to be told, they will find their own way. Because, as this says, are you curious? The goats are the curious ones. They'll figure it out for themselves. And then the idea is to take that energy and try and propagate that out through the organisation. What you learn from your original goats that are getting out there, just take that to scale in the enterprise and do it on a portfolio basis and say, okay, which of the applications in our portfolio could do with the DevOps treatment? Because ultimately what we're trying to do is to get to a continuous delivery model where the business has an idea and we've got a connected value stream to take that all the way through. So we don't do lean startup and a separate thing over there called Scrum and another thing called some sort of engineering, software development engineering processes. This is extreme programming with the example in the continuous delivery book. And then we'll do some ITSM and operations and we'll figure it all out independently. Yeah, and that's typically what we've done historically. We say, well, I'm ITSM and these are my issues and I'll do that. But the idea is we take principles from Lean and we design end-to-end from idea to value. And in the Lean world, they talk about from the idea to the ka-ching. Yeah? It's from the idea through to where the money is made. Let's design that end-to-end. And I think we've got to see that as the convergence. Everything is going to land there eventually. You go back and have a look at all those different delivery models for technology, platform as a service, software as a service, the bespoke things you'll do in your digital portfolio, they're all going to converge on this. If you're using software as a service, you might be using Salesforce, ServiceNow, you might be using Office 365, etc. You can set up dev, test, prod environments. Yeah? You can do automated testing on a lot of those now. You can write your test cases when you're writing your user stories up front here when you're talking to the business. And you can put the automated tests in down here. Yeah? We can design for a certain customer experience so that when things go wrong, we've designed for a multi-channel model to get the feedback from the customer and to pull that back through the system to the developers and to operations. So this is kind of where we're headed, as opposed to a lot of the project life cycle, throw it over the wall, whoosh, good luck with that, I'm done, project manager, contractor, I'm out of here, vendor, I'm out of here, stage left, stage right, and you're left trying to support this thing for the next however many years. Yeah? So, and we're already seeing this with our customers that we're working with on the tools, that they are standing up software as a service platforms and they're using them in this way already. Yeah? Separate dev, test and prod environments. We experiment in dev, we've got good test structure, and we can get things through into production and protect our production environment quite nicely. Now, once upon a time, and when I was doing ITIL assessments for all sorts of organisations, including banks, I would have said, yeah, I get it. you can't actually have proper dev, test, prod separation because you can't afford all of those mainframes and all those different environments. You couldn't do the emulations or the stubbing and all these other things you can now do that will actually give you production-like environments in all these different... There are banks now doing continuous delivery on production environments, making changes during the day, yeah, with what they call blue-green deployments. So I've got 2 production environments. I stop the sessions coming into this one, load balancer points them to the other one, I take this one down, make the changes, this one's operating quite fine, thank you very much, bring this one up, take that one down again, right? It's like, it's not that complicated if you think about it, how to do a change to a production system in the middle of the day. You've just got to have 2 of them and a decent load balancer at the front of that. There are probably peak periods where you try to avoid that, but typically people want to make the changes when there's actually workload going on because they'll see whether or not things work. You do them 4 a.m. on a Sunday, right? Who knows? Then you get the shit fight, pardon my French, on Monday morning when you come into work. 7 a.m, it all starts to go haywire and then you're in reactive mode, and that's a horrible way to start your week. So a lot of organisations are actually doing their changes during the day. Some of the funky organisations, so I was lucky enough to chair a conference where Gene Kim and a bunch of other people came. It was actually down here in Melbourne. And I think it was, I can't remember if it was What If or Domain or realestate.com, or which one of them said, oh, we can actually make changes remotely from down the pub on a Friday afternoon. No names, no court martials, right? But they were in that mode where they're so confident in their changes that they were used to doing them all the time. It was almost a nothing, right? Oh, okay, apparently this one's... So continuous deployment means they go through anyway, right? Develop a change of something, goes through into production. Continuous delivery is where you have a manual trigger at the end to promote it into production. They were so used to doing that code promotion into production, really comfortable with it. Yeah? And that is becoming the norm in a lot of these organisations that are using DevOps, as opposed to the experience that most of us have had with monolithic architectures that if you change one thing, you're not sure what will happen to everything else, right? It might just go haywire and explode. So a lot of us see this sort of model and go, it's nuts, but it's coming. So we've got to figure out how we in the support model can best serve that value stream. Where do we fit with that? So we kind of need the 3 ways of DevOps. The first way of DevOps is about understanding the flow from left to right. If somebody puts in a request for something, how does that traverse the organisation? I want a server. Okay, so the first fence post is a request that comes in for that server. Then where does it go after that? So understanding that from left to right is our first challenge. Now, I know somebody from one of the banks, he said it took them 6 months to figure out, for one of their mobile apps, what the path was from left to right. Yeah, 6 months. They weren't allowed to do it as an initiative, so they had to do it as skunkworks. And it was all butcher's paper down the wall. You know, it's like far out. It took them 6 months of lots of people coming to the wall and figuring it out. So that's the first challenge we've got. If we don't know how stuff gets done in our own organisation, how can we improve it? Yeah? And we're talking about the delivery, not of an incident process, a problem management or a change process. We're talking about building something that a customer is asking us for. Some sort of request for something. So that's the first thing we've got to figure out. The second thing is the feedback mechanism. So that's left to right. The feedback mechanism from right to left. So how do we instrument our value stream or our process to give feedback in a timely way so that we can resolve issues that pop up and continuously improve, not on an annual basis, but every week, potentially every day, which is more of a Japanese Kaizen sort of posture. And the third way is continual experimentation and learning. And I highly recommend the Phoenix Project. Anyone had a read of that? Yeah? Not a bad book? To make you feel really uncomfortable, the first half of it? Yeah. Because the first half of it describes your life in IT all the way up to today, most probably. The second half, it's a bit of an American story, you know, it's like the guy that's the main protagonist is an ex-Marine, so it's got a bit of that rah-rah, sort of take that hill sort of thing, which happens in the second half of the book, of course. They improve everything and they all live happily ever after. But the Phoenix Project really does, and it draws upon the goal by Eli Goldratt from the 1980s in manufacturing. It draws upon lots of really good theory, but writes it in a novel-based format. The DevOps Handbook, on the other hand, which came out in October last year, is a reference book that tells you all the detail now of how to do this in an organisation. Very, very little ITSM in there. If you get the electronic copy and you search for ITSM, you'll find it here and there mentioned as a, I wouldn't say as an afterthought, but as a given. It doesn't tell you how to change the ITSM that you have today, which is a bit of a shame because Gene's original cut of the book had much more of that. Because I don't know if you're familiar with Gene Kim. If you're not, do a little bit of research on him. He wrote a book called The Visible Ops Handbook, which is my favourite iTool book. The Visible Ops Handbook was generated out of research he did for the top performing companies that were using ITSM. So those that are reporting they're getting the value out of their ITSM investments, what are they doing differently than those that are not doing so well? And so the Visible Ops Handbook came out as a result of that. Gene has also been CTO of a company called Tripwire, security software company. So he knows the world of security, he knows the world of audit, he knows the world of ITSM. So his original version of the book was quite thorough in its treatment of ITSM and audit and those sorts of things. But when he wrote the DevOps Handbook, he had to work with Jez Humble, the guy that wrote the Continuous Delivery book from ThoughtWorks. Patrick Dubois, who's the original founder of the DevOps movement. He ran the first DevOps days in Bruges in Belgium back in 2009. And John Willis, who's a Docker evangelist, runs the DevOps Cafe podcast. And John Allspaw also writes the foreword, and he's one of the significant figures. So what you've got there is everybody's opinions all sort of harmonised into one book of 480-something pages. It's pretty hard yards. Good reference. Yeah, so it's got everything in it that you need, but it elaborates a lot on real practices to get these things done, whereas the Phoenix Project is more about inspiration, trying to get you to aspire to do these sorts of things. Now, some of the key things that come out of this DevOps movement, so there's an annual State of DevOps report that is sponsored by Puppet Labs. The 2017 version is just out. There's a consistent message every year about IT performance, and peer-reviewed change approval is one of the things that that everybody believes in and is reinforced every year. So one of the things we have as a challenge if we're sitting in a change advisory board is we actually don't know how to code, do we? Right? I mean, if anybody in that room is actually a coding professional, I'd be surprised. So how are you going to actually figure out whether or not they've followed the right coding practices, whether they've architecturally followed the right principles, etc., whether they've recognised the interdependencies between their change and other software? It's like, so the best companies actually have another coder peer review that change. It's the same in any service though. It's somebody that's close to the work and can actually interrogate that change to the extent where they can go thumbs up, thumbs down, sideways, not really sure, need to do some more investigation with some authority. Yeah, as opposed to saying, well, the change advisory board approved it. Well, we try, right? But as a change advisory board, that's kind of a tough ask, isn't it? To actually have any sort of level of diligence, any deep insight into what's actually going on in there. So I quite like this. Proactive monitoring of the service and the internals of the service, not whether the server is up. It's actually understanding what's going on in the transactions within a service. High trust organisational culture, we'd expect that. Win-win relationship between dev and ops, and version control for all production artifacts. So these are 5 things that you would kind of expect to see in a high-performing organisation. This one might not be so intuitive. Yeah. One of the other things that's quite intuitive, and it's actually not on these slides, counterintuitive. As you go faster, so if we've got a frequency of deployment, let's say we deploy every day, what do you think the related incident count would be? Would it go up or down from where you are today? If you accelerated to change things every day instead of every quarter, would you get more or less incidents per release? Sorry? So that's what we think, right? And they're actually finding exactly the opposite, right? So because you have line of sight of the change, you only made the change this morning, you put it in production today, the likelihood of it going wrong is fairly low because the granularity, the size of the change is typically small. And so the other thing that you might not expect either is that the MTTR, the response time to the incident, is way, way, way quicker. because we know what we changed and somebody's looking for it. Yeah? Somebody's monitoring what we put out there today, and as soon as the feedback comes out, oops, we know what that is, off we go and let's recover that because we wondered about that, right? So if you aggregate all of your changes up into a quarterly release where you've got lots of things going out, much harder, isn't it? Yeah. So these things are a little counterintuitive. We kind of think as we go faster, it's going to make train smashes. Now, I would suggest if you're in a monolithic architecture on one of our legacy systems, yeah, I wouldn't be changing to a daily deployment anytime soon. There's a few assumptions behind this. Most of these organisations are doing microservices architectures where you've got small modules in an application that are decoupled via APIs. So if you make a change to a line of code there, it can only affect that. Yeah, that's the idea of that sort of architectural approach. So it's a very different world that we're headed towards, and the reality is we've got to manage those legacy architectures alongside these newer ones that are coming in. So what does it look like? Yeah, so we've got an end-to-end multi-stage process, but once we've got the full expression of continuous delivery into the organisation, that's all automated. And in this particular case, this is continuous delivery. So continuous deployment means there's no manual trigger, it just goes all the way through. But so what we've got is a multi-stage process, and eventually we press a button to put a release out there. Now when we're talking about a release in DevOps terms, we're talking about when it goes live on the customer's mobile app. Yeah? So they can actually access the functionality. Now Facebook surprised everybody when they said, oh, well, the chat feature that's in Facebook, that's actually been live in production for 12 months. Right? You just didn't know about it. We just switched it on for you today. Yeah? But we rolled it out 12 months ago, and we've been testing with different demographics around the world just to make sure that it's going to scale, and the usability factors of the chat are as good as anything else in the marketplace, because that's how we like to do things at Facebook. So that surprised everybody. It's been out there 12 months, right? So that's the release. The day that it goes live in the customer's hand is then. Now in ITIL terms, we've been talking about release packages for many years, and we use the term release to mean the thing that we actually deliver across into production. So there is some language around DevOps that's worthwhile knowing some of those differences. Okay, so this is where we're headed with a lot of this. And if you think about your change process and how it works today, or how your incident problem change flow might work, it's a very different world by the time we get to continuous delivery. Salesforce have all of the, so the key to it is standard changes. So with Salesforce, everything's a standard change that's automated, because by the time it gets automated, it's been around the block. They've practiced this change a number of times. It's automated. They practiced it a couple of times. Automated in the dev environment, the test environment. It apparently works. We can do this change now as a pre-approved standard change. Yeah. So anything automated is a standard change as far as Salesforce is concerned. Anything manual, got to go to the cab. Yeah. So the motivation is to move things from a normal change that's got to go to the cab to a standard change that's pre-approved and can go through quite quickly. So that's how these organisations are starting to operate. They're still following the process, but they're trying to get things as standardised and automated as possible. And the incident problem change flow is quite different as well, because the application support people are on the hook very, very quickly. It's not an ops production support applications team, it's the developers are handling a lot of the work. Particularly for the early life part of it, the developers are on the hook to support their own product. And you may have heard Werner Vogels from Amazon talk about, you build it, you run it. Yep, and by the way, if you don't write APIs with your code, you get sacked. It's as simple as that. Werner, he just says that's how it is, and then that's how it is. So that's interesting, isn't it? It's very, very different. So our process have got to be able to handle this. But it's not, you know, it's not rocket science. It's about standardizing the change and having incident models, request models, change models, designing these things so that we know how to do it in the same sort of cadence as this. Yeah? So what's the support model for or the incident model for my digital app? Well, the incident model it's largely coming in via our customer service function, via a web channel, and we're taking it straight to the developers. right? There's my model, and I expect these types of incidents at this type of frequency to be coming into our organisation. This is how we're going to measure them. This is how we're going to do the incident problem change cycle. In fact, it'll be called defects for most of the applications. Okay, so we've been talking a little bit about value streams as we've been going along, and I'll get into that on the next slide in a little bit more detail. But we're seeing a lot of horizontal practices here. Work going from left to right across the organisation, as opposed to sitting in this part of the organisation for 3 months, then going to that, to another, etc. It's really about a continuous flow of value. And so there are 4 main value streams that IT for IT talks about: strategy to portfolio, requirements to deploy, request to fulfill, and detect to correct. And we have a number of these, what I would call support capabilities, sitting underneath that. So IT for IT is very, very respectful to ITIL. It uses all the ITIL language. It uses all of the ITIL modules you would have in your support tools. And I'll show you that in a tick. So it's not trying to do anything controversial. It came out of a piece of work done by HP for Shell. So Carl van Zeeland, who was the architect at Shell, said, "I've had enough of this, HP. I buy all of your tools, none of them work together. I can't get stuff to go from ideation through to production, to monitor things, to publish it out into a service like a request portal. None of this works together. Can you please show me a reference architecture for how your tools are all going to connect together and how I'm going to see the flow of value through my organisation?" So Lars Rossen from HP in Denmark was given the challenge of trying to come up with a model. And they ended up putting together a consortium which included a few of the big consulting firms, and they put together this IT for IT thing. I stood back and went, "Hey, that's actually pretty cool. What might we do with that?" And so then they gifted it to the Open Group, who owns TOGAF and Archimate and a number of other practices, and said, "Would you like this as, you know, a body of knowledge to put out there to the architecture community in some ways?" Because the Open Group is fairly architecture centric. If you go to one of their conferences, they're mostly EA types that are there. But they're a very intelligent group that kind of gets this, and they go, "Okay, well, what does that mean for my ITSM now? Well, my ITSM is mostly request to fulfill, detect to correct. How does that all work together? Well, we better put ITIL into there." And so you'll see that in the next couple of slides. What I like about this is, rather than saying strategy, design, transition, operate, improve, by the way, where's build, right? It's just one of the problems in the orthodoxy is that we forgot build in ITIL. Disenfranchise. Talk about way to create friends in dev, right? No, you don't exist. We create SDPs and we put them out to the market, and somebody builds stuff and then you transition it in. So it was written by ITSM folks just for ITSM and disenfranchised a whole bunch of others. Bit of a shame. But what the IT for IT model says is, ITIL, that's, you know, and PMI and Agile, you've all got your own things to do. What we're trying to do is see this from the customer's perspective. If I'm the business and I've got strategies, I want to turn them into a portfolio of initiatives. From those initiatives, I want to take them from requirements through to deployment. I want to build stuff. I want to fulfill requests against the services that I've built. And when things go wrong, I want to take them from the incident to the problem to the change and be able to get the customer back up and working structurally within as short as time as possible. That's not to say that we do incident problem change in one flow. We might pause in problem for a little while, but we're not done until the structural change goes in, is what the underlying principle is there. So what does that look like? Well, actually, it's worthwhile noting that the EA part of it up here delivers conceptual services that turn into physical services down here. Yeah. So the language of service that we're familiar with is absolutely what this is all about. Yeah. And it's very consistent with ITIL terminology, and it's very consistent with the continuous delivery thing that we were just talking about as well. It doesn't matter whether it's an SDLC Prince2 based project, or whether it's scaled agile, or whether it's a Kanban based approach. It doesn't really matter. How you get from requirements to deployment is really, you know, dependent upon what the portfolio requires. If you're in a system of innovation, something that's got to move pretty quick, you're probably going to be using some sort of agile. If you're in a system of record that's moving on a annual release cycle, you'll be using some sort of SDLC project management based approach. Doesn't really matter. These things still hold, and the architecture holds with it. So just on the value stream thing, before we have a quick look at the architecture, I just want to make sure you understand how powerful this concept of value streams is. I mean, it's easy to say, well, it's just the voice of the customer and things are going from left to right, but there's more to it. So, if you want to dive deeper, Karen Martin's book, Value Stream Mapping, is a good guide. And we're going to handle request and its information in. So I get it at first level, or I get it in the apps team or somewhere, and I say, okay, so what's the lead time? Lead time is how long does it stay in a queue from end to end until it's done. Processing time, how long does it take to actually do? There's a story here that you're fairly familiar with. How long do my incidents sit in a queue? How long does it take to actually do them in this function? Then I take it down to another function. Here's my fixed on first sort of stuff going on, my standard requests, my non-standard requests, they're all traversing the organisation. Couldn't fix it on first, I passed it on. It sits in this queue for a day. When I process it at second level, it takes me 10 minutes. Oh, by the way, down the bottom here, we've got this thing called completeness and accuracy. For argument's sake, 50% of the time, we escalated in the wrong direction. We thought it was a this, but it was actually a that. It presented in terms of the PC, but it was actually the application, for example. So it's gone to the wrong team. Comes and bounces again across to here. So we've got, and eventually we might get to a third level. Guess what? Another day in a queue, 10 minutes of processing time, completeness and accuracy of 50%. So it's taken us 3 days. Processing time's 30 minutes. That gives us an activity ratio in terms of value as far as the customer is concerned of 2%. Yeah? It would have taken half an hour to... That's why when the CIO or the CTO yells, it actually gets done in half an hour. Yeah? Because it can be done in half an hour. So we've got these bucket mechanisms that hold stuff. Yeah? We're air traffic controlling work until we've got someone available to deal with it. But as far as the customer is concerned, that's all non-value add. So half an hour out of 3 days. And by the way, because we get it wrong a fair bit, there's a lot of go-rounds. Yeah? Now, you could spend a lot of time doing an as-is and a to-be map on this in terms of the process. It would net you not a lot of value. You do this at the whiteboard and you go, oh dear. Oh dear. This is the team at second level that causes me all the problems in this particular value stream. This is the problem that's caused by the contention between project work and BAU work. You know, all of those things, right? Our structural problems that we go, oh, gee, wouldn't it be better if we organised a different way? Well, this will give you the numbers that'll tell you what the result would be if processing time equaled lead time. Yeah? That's the limit of it. And that's what happens when you stand up a portal and I go to a self-service model, or I get the community to do the support. And I've got the knowledge articles out the front of the process. I've done the shift left all the way out to the community managing it. Yeah? There's your business case. I no longer, so now lead time and processing time are the same, and by the way, they're minutes because I can self-serve, because I've got good context-aware search capability at the front end and people can actually look after themselves. I take all that work out of the queue. It doesn't bounce down to all of those other functions. It's always as accurate as I can do it at first level. Yeah, and then if it doesn't work at first level, I've got other people who can dive on that. So it changes the model a lot if we take that value stream thinking. If I just mapped incident management end to end and talked about how am I going to solve that, I wouldn't get my business case for level 0. Right? I would just be trying to do a better job of what was in the iTool book in 19 whenever. So it's a really important concept, and the executives will get it. Okay, so this is a really, really difficult slide to penetrate, but let's give it a crack. So on the left, we've got strategy to portfolio. So the result of this strategy to portfolio process is I have a portfolio of conceptual services that I want to build. I then take them through requirements to deployment. I put them out there into a shopping cart. Now, not everything goes via a shopping cart, I know, but this is the future. So I'm going to handle most of my things through a request on a portal, some standard, some non-standard, and I'm going to be able to charge back for that. So that's request to fulfill, and then detect, correct. When something goes wrong, I'm going to have been monitoring it. I'm going to trigger an event. I'm going to raise an incident. I'm going to deal with it in problem management. I'll create a known error. In fact, that'll end up going into a backlog over here. So what I've got here at this layer level 1 is a connected flow from an idea over on this side all the way through to operations on that side. A conceptual service to an actual service. Now, not many organisations have managed to crack that. And ITIL has not attempted to do that. In fact, most models haven't even attempted to sort of put the ITIL bits and pieces that we know and enjoy into a framework where you can see what all of the different layers are. So down here, for example, at level 2, I can see all of the different artifacts and relationships and everything that moves around. Expect this to be how you assess the tool fitness for purpose in the future. So the open group will be releasing a tool assessment guide that will be looking at this, rather than the pink verify that says these are all the functional requirements you need to satisfy for an ITIL tool. Yeah? Which is kind of where we got to in the late 90s and hasn't really been updated since. So now we're actually looking at a reference architecture that shows us all of the relationships we need to have down at the lower layers. So it goes down 3 layers. There's another layer below this, and then they suggest that there's actually 5 layers. If you get down into the particular tool set that you use, it'll actually be right down another 2 layers from this. So how do I do my business rules and notifications and fields and reporting? That's actually another couple of layers down from this. But this is setting up a framework for how we can make all of these tools work together. And when I go into an organisation these days, I'm asking the executives questions about how all their tools fit together across the life cycle. And they look at me blankly and I'm saying, well, shouldn't that stuff connect to that stuff? No, projects are different than operations. Yeah, okay. That's why things get thrown over the wall and you've got no support model and you've got no security and you've got no... They need to be designed over here in the conceptual... back up. Over in the conceptual service over here, we have all of those things. Yeah? And when we get down to the actual service, which is in the same DB, and the practices to manage this thing, we've got all of those things covered. Not just... Well, the EA have got their roadmaps and the PMO implements stuff and then we sort of take care of it downstream and try to fix it up in production. The other thing that's nice about this is that it plays well with others. The open group have been very, very cautious about all of these other models and frameworks. They should be, because these communities have got quite an investment in where they are now. The practices they're following, the tools that they're already using, the investments they've made. So we don't want to say you're all wrong. We want to say you are where you are. Here's an architecture to converge on. As you're making your decisions going forward, and that's all enterprise architecture has ever tried to be. It's where you want to get to. Don't try and build this reference architecture tomorrow, right? It's just when you come up to your next decision, you need to converge towards a connected view from end to end rather than diverging and saying, oh, well, this one's a lot cheaper than the other. I don't care whether or not it connects to the rest of the world. We only do ticketing anyway. It's a race to mediocrity if you just argue for the cheaper version of where you are now. Yeah? So the idea is you should be trying to converge on one operating model where it all connects together and it is managed as a system with common metrics, upstream and downstream, and we kind of know what we're all doing. And there's a couple of technical standards there as well. Archimate 2, I think it's Archimate 2 is used to define a lot of these things, and UML as well, which is out of my league. The other thing that the open group, and in particular Charlie Betts has done, anybody see Charlie at the ITSMF? Presented last year, the national conference. I presented on this stuff the year before. It's been around for a couple of years now. But Charlie pointed out the fact that there are queues all over this. Yeah? Go back to our value stream that we were talking about earlier. Each one of these is the same problem. Yeah? Whether it's a demand backlog, whether it's a project backlog, whether it's a story, a sprint. A sprint is a 2-week delay. Yeah? Or if it's a 2-week sprint. Could be a 4-week, could be a 6-week, could be 3 months. Yeah? All of those things are queues. Business wants value over here, and we've got to try and get it to over here in the shortest time possible, at the lowest level of risk and cost. That's really what we're trying to do. So I think this reference architecture really helps our executives understand that they don't just, they shouldn't just be doing this. I manage apps, or I manage ops, or I manage this, or I manage that. I don't care about these other functions, these other things that are upstream and downstream of me. Well, you should care, because This is what is happening to the business. They're getting stuck in all of these queues. And IT itself is doing lots of investment in lots of different things that don't connect together. So we did this for a large government client in New South Wales recently, where they wanted to see, well, you know, they were looking at a particular new tool, and they wanted to see how that would relate to all of the other tools that they were working with or investing in. What might be able to, you know, displace or replace some of the things, the legacy things. And so we said, well, look, on one page, we can see all of the detect correct tools together. Head of ops went, huh? I didn't know the scope of your thing was to include all of the ops stuff. I said, well, why would you exclude ops when we're talking about incident management, event management, monitoring, all of those sorts of things? So this is a very interesting map for an organisation. Same with request to fulfill. There are all these different forms, all these different shopping carts, all this stuff, and converging them on one model was a really important thing to help them with. So that's another use of IT for IT, is to actually just to show a current state and future state. And you could do them by release and say, okay, well, in the next 6 months we're going to do this, in the next 6 months. So you can colour code it, you can do various things to make it obvious. Another thing you could do is, and this is from Mark Bodman, who's an IT for IT forum member that I do a little bit of backwards and forwards sort of theory stuff with. He sent me this the other day, and it's how he's been using it. So in the priorities for a company, you know, I've got priorities: risk, productivity, growth, and cost. Okay, so I've got risk issues down here in detect correct. I'm going to give that to John for the next 12 months. Michael is going to handle deliver, and it's going to handle the portfolio, and we're actually going to defer the issues around test in terms of risk there for the moment. That'll be handled in the next 12 months. So it's another way, another mapping to show people what our priorities are at a high-level capability perspective. The next one is another thing that we've used with organisations to say, okay, well, these are the various steps in each one of these value streams: operations, governance, technology, business management. What are the tools that you're using in all of those? What's your level of capability? This particular view is of the tools. And we're saying, okay, if it's green, it's functional and integrated, i.e. it does what we need it to do and it's integrated. Here it's functional but decoupled. Yes, it's nice, but it's decoupled. So we've got a separate knowledge management system, for example, and we're doing problem management in a spreadsheet. Functional gap, clearly decoupled, so you know we're not doing that. And there's some that we've not evaluated, and we'll get to that later. So this is another view that we've been using to talk to executives about what they should be doing with the overall portfolio of capabilities and the tools, processes, roles, etc. in the organisation. Another way of expressing that capability model that I've put together with the team. One of the things we recognise is that we're still trying to solve the problem in terms of process maturity. Level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's embedded in the COBIT model, so ISO 15504. There's lots of level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But it's not really telling you about the capability to serve your business. So we came up with this idea, well, the foundational capability that most organisations should have by now. Well, we should have service desk, portal, all of this, basic self-service ways, all of that, yeah? And most of us would be pretty happy as support professionals if we managed to achieve that. But I'd be suggesting actually you want to have some sort of discovery going on so that you've got real-time CMDB. We've got a service catalogue of mature service level management, monitoring and event management, etc., etc. Self-service is our predominant mode for request management or request fulfillment. And then when we get up to here, we're actually integrated into the life cycle. So we've got a lot of other things going on. Eventually, we might have that whole IT for IT thing all sorted, yeah, and all working well together. So rather than process maturity, if you think about capability, I can offer a much better value for the business here. The business doesn't care if I'm level 2.5 or level 3. It's really irrelevant. Not that fussed about that at all. They are fussed about percentage of work completed within SLA, mean time to fulfill requests, savings from self-service, mean cost of incidents and failed change. Those sorts of things that the business would really like to know. Yeah? And we might be able to measure those at this level. And as we go up through these other levels, there are new things that we're going to be able to measure and demonstrate to the business in terms of value. So this is a little bit of a call to action, I guess, for service management people to stop worrying about the process maturity level. Did it make a difference being at level 3 for change or incident? Which most of you would be, right? You've got an incident management process, an incident management process owner, change the same, you've got a cab, you're ticking most of the boxes, problem management's probably level 1.5, you're aware you've got a few bits and pieces going on, config's a basket case, because it always is, can be solved by the way, we're getting there these days. But right, knowing that hasn't really solved anything in particular. Yeah? It doesn't give you a business case for investment in connecting the dots with operations. Yeah, and getting that better MTTR and better customer experience out. And so we've got to think about things in terms of capability rather than maturity level. And where we're headed is more down towards this end. Virtual reality experiences, where we're actually talking with Alexa, Siri, Cortana, Neymar, or Sophie, which I'll talk about in a tick. We're going to be having this dialogue in a customer experience sort of world where the customer is really interested in you being able to talk their language in their time frame with the form factor that they're carrying at the moment, the context they're in, and actually solve their problems very quickly. And to do that, there are a number of tools that you're going to need. Anomaly detection, predictive modeling, benchmarking, performance forecasting. So we've got to be asking for more out of our tool sets. Yeah? Okay, so that's a little bit of the future of ITSM as we know it. And then I want to look a little bit further over the horizon as well. So I was talking to the CEO of the DevOps Institute a couple of months ago, and she was saying that ITSM has kind of reached its zenith, and now if we look for the unicorns in the world of service management, we're actually got to go to the site reliability engineers that are at Facebook, Google and other places like that. What are they doing? So it's clear if you're a Netflix that you're a technical business, and so you've got to have, just like Agile and DevOps, site reliability engineering, which I'll talk about what that really means in a tick. But you're going to need a very, very high level of service management and operations tightly coupled together. But I'd suggest that all of us are technology-enabled organisations now. There are very few organisations that I talk to people that say, "Oh, look, email's down today. I've got to go home. I actually can't. Oh, network's down. I can't do my job. I can go to 4G. I might as well be anywhere." You can't do your work in any organisation these days without your technology up and running, because we've put. I mean, I've been paperless for about 3 years now. I just don't use paper at all. People occasionally send it to me and I ask them not to, if at all possible, because I want to deal with everything. At worst, it's a PDF. Yeah? And I take notes with my Apple Pencil and it turns into a PDF which synchronises with Evernote. I never have physical copies of those sorts of things. Sign electronically, etc. So all of us, the trajectory is towards a technology-enabled organisation. So site reliability engineers operate in a different way. So green light, a new release on current product performance. So if you can't demonstrate at Google that you've done a good job with the old version, then they're not going to let you release a new version. Why would you do that? It's an own goal, right? So your ability to change something is based on your performance in the past. So that's how they treat releases. Okay, you're a green light service because you typically get things right. So that's interesting. The SREs can code too. And so there's an argument for us as, we discussed this yesterday, we have a monthly hack day in our company. We all get together at my place and we sort of do a bit of a hackathon on the business. And I'm suggesting to our team, why would it be that a process consultant can't configure the tool these days? Yeah, sure, there's a point where it goes to scripting because you want to do some sort of business rule or some field, or you need to do these things that are slightly outside the out-of-the-box world. But why can't the process owner jump into the tool and say, this is how I'd like to do it. all right, I'm going to run this up in dev and see how it goes, have a bunch of people jump in and have a look at it, and then maybe we'll put that into the next release in a couple of weeks' time. So site reliability engineers actually code. They do the infrastructure as code thing. And I'm just suggesting to ITSM people, well, maybe the new breed of tools should support us in configuring our own processes. I wrote a blog piece about 3 years ago called Process Consultants, Your Days Are Numbered. Because I've delivered so many 90-page process documents over the last 20 years, right? It's not funny. The incident process document that's to beat them all, right? It's got everything it's all the integrations identified, all the roles and responsibilities, metrics, continuous improvement, blah, blah, blah. It's all there. Does it get used? No, it's devastating as a process consultant. You come in 2 years later to do an assessment, you go, it's still got my name on it. That's the worst thing, right? It's nobody's taken ownership of the work we did together. They're not serious about it. Yeah, and because most of the time they go, that's great, but it's vaporware because our tool doesn't do it. And by the way, we're not getting the upgrade until 2 years down the track. We've got to get past that world. The tools that we're selecting, the tools that we're working with, have got to iterate with our organisations, not wait 2 years for the next upgrade because that's the development path of that organisation. We've really got to giddy up. So we should be involved in that. And they drive to an availability budget. At Google, they have a 0.05% budget to use every month for experiments. Yeah, so if things go wrong, it's all good. If it's within that 0.05% budget, typically nobody will ever notice. It's experiments they run fairly safely, but if they blow it, right, that's it. That's their budget for the month. And they can only go and play in dev environments. They won't get the real experience. So they protect that 0.05%, yeah, so that they can run their big production experiments. Pretty cool. Okay, so we're in the home stretch, getting there. So the things that are coming at us now, and I find it fascinating that I was looking at this stuff as being out there, and I'm on the feeds from McKinsey and Boston Consulting Group and a bit of Gartner and this and that. So I'm getting AI and bot sort of stuff, and I'm going, oh yeah. I'm getting a little bit numb to it. I get so much of it. But then I jump on to SAP, Oracle. I see what ServiceNow is doing, what Salesforce is doing. They're actually all putting machine learning, AI, bots, they're in the platform now. Yeah, and of course there's lots of bolt-on stuff that you can do. And so, you've got all, in fact, that's what Sophie does. That's actually been started up by a couple of Australians who you might know, Paul Heath and Dion Williams, have started a company now where they've got, it's basically an enterprise bot, which will go across all of the enterprise systems at the front end, yeah, bringing through knowledge from all the different systems. So that's their take on it. But this is mainstreaming now. If you just go to the SAP site, do yourself a favour. You know Microsoft's doing that with Cortana, right? So all of these are becoming bot enabled. Yeah, I have that in Microsoft Teams now on Office 365. A little bot pops up on the side and says, what would you like to know? Would you like help in getting started, etc., etc. So if you go back to the value stream, you can see it saves you all that time. If the bot pops up just in time when you've got the question and it's contextually aware and can give you, and when we're not talking about that little clippy sort of paperclip thing from the 90s, was it? Office, which version of Office was that? I think it was Office 90. Oh, geez, sorry, I'm taking us all back too far. But funny stuff. So the idea is, well, how do we then take these technologies and how do we operate that? So this is a slide I put up a couple of years ago in this context, in this forum. How do we design for a digital customer experience? And you note I'm not talking about IT specifically here because this could be used in any context. So I've got my chat rooms and feeds, and I've got my booking system and bots. I've got all sorts of things going on at the shop front of IT. So I'm now having to design for a user experience, right, to understand all of these things. And I need to design a support capability that can handle all of this and think about all of this together. So for device incidents, for example, I might want to have physical locations, the Genius Bar sort of concept, because people have got physical problems with the device. It can't be, how am I going to deal with that? Am I going to get it couriered? Probably not. If I've got volume, yeah, so a lot of our customers these days will have the Genius Bar type setup at their larger corporate headquarters. So you need to challenge your support model and see, well, how do we stack up against that for all the different types of transactions we have in all these channels? And in what cases would we swarm on things? Now, the idea of swarm is you take everybody upstream to the incident and you do this in critical incident management, right? So you're familiar with this. You create some sort of conference bridge or a war room or something like that. Everyone dashes in there, brings all the latest and greatest things that they know about whatever the change is or the disaster that's just going on, and you work as quickly as you can together on that. These days, you set it up as a virtual thing in a chat room. There's some nice videos on that. If you look at what Atlassian does, they've got that sorted out pretty well. But if you think about that from a value stream perspective, there's no bounces. Yeah? So there's no queue. I pull everybody to the work, so there's no escalations. There's very few chances, or there's a lot less chances of getting things wrong because I've got all the people in the room and I could test things together. That worked, that didn't work. You're really accelerating the whole thing. Now, some of the more modern tool sets, just like in Link, you can see if somebody's there, can I pull them to the swarm? If the green light's on, I can pull them to the swarm. We have an agreement about that. Yeah? So that's another thing to consider in the model. Another thing to think about is the traditional old page 136 of the ITIL service design book. It used to be in the availability management book from 1990 something when it was a single book. The incident life cycle starting with services available goes down. We've got time to detect, time to diagnose, repair, recover, restore. Got some uptime, then happens again. So this is all a candidate for looking at ways of reducing the lead time. So the mean time to detect, how can we do that? How can we figure out how to diagnose things? So that's where artificial intelligence can spot anomalies. And if we get it right, we actually detect things before they go wrong. Yeah? So before the incident actually presents as an outage, we actually see the anomalous behavior. A transaction that doesn't seem to be behaving like the way we would expect it to. Yeah? And so we've got a way of remediating that through intelligent automation. If this happens, add more capacity. If this happens, stop this process, restart. Okay? So you use intelligent automation to basically, the limit of this, if you say, well, if I got this right in every one of them, I could maybe get my MTTR down to 0, potentially. Not necessarily 0, but some of it might be before the customer. It never ever happens as far as the customer's concerned. Yeah? And that's what a Netflix is trying to do. 0 downtime that the customer feels, right? Because you don't want to be stopped in the middle of a movie waiting for a Netflix to... I mean, sometimes it's buffering. Okay, we're all used to that. But we don't want the movie to sort of abnormally end and fall over. And then next thing you know, we're on Stan, we're on Foxtel, or we're on iTunes. Netflix knows that. So the way they organise their incident life cycle, which is effectively, this is the value stream. That's why I like this picture so much, and I always have, is this is a value stream-based view of incident management. It doesn't say, we do this and we do that and blah, blah, blah. We write down all the detail of the activity. It says, well, these are the numbers. Okay. So I would just summarise by saying the service desk is not the place for incident detection. And we know that in the ITIL book it says the service desk is accountable for the incident process, the incident life cycle end to end. That's difficult. I'd suggest that in the future, well, down at Netflix that's not true. Operations is responsible for the incident life cycle. We'll get more and more of that. Amazon will tell you when it's broken. Azure will tell you when it's broken. The platform or the software as a service will tell you when it's broken. They've got native monitoring in them, yeah? So we've just got to be able to pull that into a central operational place and figure out what the business impact is of those various events that are coming in and then be able to react and notify the customer. So really where we're headed is towards customer experience. So that's actually the emerging role. Instead of managing incident problem and those sorts of things, at the front level, so at the first level of support, will really be responsible for the experience that the customer is having today. Experience with their end user services, experience they'll be having with their application servers, etc. But the measurement and the management of the incident, for example, will be in the operations world. So Gartner's got quite a nice little model for that. And what we've got to figure out is, well, how can we use our current tools and leading management thinking to create a market-leading customer experience? That's where we've got to be heading, the battle for the customer. And so our customer experience is what we've got to be working on. So I would suggest, and this is another value flow model because I couldn't find one that effectively did this. The first level, or the foundational level of customer experience, is engagement. So how do we engage with our customers? Have we got the right digital shop front? Are we bringing through customers in a way that's good for them? And then how do we make sure that we're cross-functionally well organised, that we're applying technology to the value stream in the most efficient possible way, and we know what the value streams are. We've got customer experience analytics. We've got connected communities. And so you see what Telstra does with their communities, the community support. Anybody logged on and had a look at, had an issue with Telstra? Probably at some point. But if you go, like I've got Telstra ADSL, I have the odd issue, I'll go to their support page these days as my first port of call, as long as I've still got connectivity. But I can get that on 4G devices, etc. So it's pretty easy to get to their support and have a look in the community and check stuff like router settings and those sorts of things without staying in a queue for 15, 20 minutes. So a cross-functional way of doing... Sorry? You've got a hotline? Not really. Not really. And the institutional memory of, I just said that to that person over there, that still happens, right? It's like, it's better than it was, though, I've got to say, that the investment they've made, and the other thing that Telstra do quite well is that they've actually got really good videos these days of a lot of things as well. So as long as you can access YouTube, you can actually figure a lot of stuff out. In the fullness of time, the product lifecycle will integrate the support model as well. And it does now if you look at the banks and the way they'll handle their mobile apps, yeah? They've got all the channels sorted out, yeah? And IT, yeah, is probably a second or third level, and it'll go straight past the IT service desk because that would only add time into the value stream. But the orthodoxy says single point of contact and all that sort of stuff, not if it doesn't serve the value stream, yeah? And I've come across that recently for a financial services organisation. They followed the ITIL orthodoxy, and even their external customer calls were going to an external service desk that they'd outsourced to somebody else for no added value. Crazy stuff. Okay, so we're really looking for a digital customer experience in the fullness of time, and I know that with my bank, the experience I have on the phone, the laptop, the tablet, the browser, they are all pretty much the same, whether it's equities trading, retail banking, investment banking, superannuation or insurance, right? The particular bank that I work with sells all of those things, and I can do it pretty much all through these devices in a very, very similar way. I've got a couple of different logons that I need to use at the moment. My client ID changes in two of them, but equities trading is a little bit different than retail banking. So there's some reasons behind some of that in terms of regulation. Okay. What Dave Favell presentation would go without an operating model slide? I always have to put this out there because essentially all of what we're talking about here is our service portfolio. It's always evolving. I've got my digital stuff now, I've got my traditional workloads, but I've got all of these things that I need to organise around that. And okay, so some of my value streams need to go to a higher velocity now, and I'm going to bring some new technologies in to automate. Once upon a time, I would have just said, okay, well, I've got workflows, and I've got, I've got some event management, etc. My tools portfolio to serve this is getting more and more useful, but it takes investment to manage. Yeah. I've got to have the smarts in my organisation to do that. But these are all of the components that I need. How do I engage with my business? How do I engage with my suppliers? How do I organise my value streams, my measurement and improvement, my technologies, my governance, and all of that in terms of leadership and culture? What do I need in terms of culture and leadership to be successful? So the role of ITSM professionals like us, so what do we do with all of this in the future? We just covered, 48 slides, 47 slides to this point of stuff. What does that mean? So what might we need to do differently? So one of the things that we've not done very deliberately is design the customer experience. Who are the personas in my organisation? How would they like to engage? What services are they consuming? What is the journey they should be having as they traverse our services? What's the best possible way of serving our customers for what they're prepared to pay? That's also a thing. But as you can see with a portal, for example, that crunches down. It's native to most of the tool sets you'd be using now. That crunches down so much time for everybody. Yeah, very, very much improved customer experience. But now I need to design what should come through the call channel, what should go through chat, what should be self-service. So deliberately design those things, managing the workloads between them, communications and communities. What can I put out there? Now, anyone who's done an ERP implementation in the last 20-something years, you always look for super users and try to create communities around them, all that sort of stuff. Well, our support model should be about facilitating those communities, making sure we're moving as much of the work out there as possible to them and providing services that are going to help them. Designing and scripting for the bots. Machine learning has to be trained. We've got to ingest the data into it, teach it what we're looking for, and then sense check what it comes back with. Some people have done some failed bot implementations already. They've gone, oh, how hard can it be? Just put a bot out there. Oops, everyone hates it. That really sucks, because we're going to have to wait a little before we can do that again. Yeah, and I've seen the same thing with portals. Poorly designed portals, bang them out there. Yeah, that wasn't so good. Let's roll that back. Or not having the confidence to even do it because we actually don't know what our services are, we don't know what the service levels are, we don't know the workflows, so we don't really want to expose our services out to the customer. So there's a lot of work that we've got to do. And in the future, you know, one of the great questions on a YouTube video with the Facebook CTO, I said, so how do you relate to support? So, oh, look, support are our friends. So ops handles the incident life cycle, but support has a seat at the table. What is the impact on the customer? What's going on? So there's an operational relationship and there's an ongoing customer experience relationship where they're trying to help ops do a better job and they're trying to get feedback from ops on what they can be expecting coming down the track. Running analytics and advising senior management. Because one of the challenges, we've had historically good, well, okay, management reporting, right? I can tell you how many incidents we had, what the average duration of them was, what the priority was, against which services, etc. But what real insight can I give to senior management about why? Because we're just treating them as buckets. Yeah, I've got 5% more incidents this month than I had last month. In which services? What were the transactions that were impacted? Now, if we're going to add value as a support function in the future, we've actually got to have a little bit of insight into those things because the information is there. We've just got to not look at things as buckets and do the obvious management reporting of how much is in the bucket. Actually, so just to summarise here, this is an important concept, and it's something that Bezos would say. It's something that Musk does. The reason that Musk can get rockets up to the stratosphere and deliver satellite payloads and those sorts of things for a fraction of the price of Boeing or Lockheed is because he doesn't follow the orthodoxy. He thinks of a new system. He says, we need to be able to do this in X days for this amount of money. How might we do it? Instead of empirically designing from the engineering up, he looks at the outcome and comes back from that. So if we want to get 1 million people to Mars, what's the price point? About 250,000 US per head, about what it needs to cost. How do I do that? Right? That's how Musk goes about it, and he thinks about the system that needs to be created to achieve the outcome, and they work on that as much as they work on the sales and all of the other things that they need to do. And that's what Bezos does at Amazon. Everybody, customer service is their thing. So all of the executives have to go and work in the call center. Yeah, once a month, got to go and spend time in the call center. So it's about understanding the system that you manage and working on that relentlessly. Otherwise, we're just working in the system, picking up stuff, shuffling it, passing it downstream. Yeah, and the roles like that. You just do a little bit of research on AI and the impact of bots and those sorts of things. The role of picking up things and doing them, not so much of that in the future. Yeah, there's a book called Lights in the Tunnel that's worthwhile having a look at from a guy called Martin Ford. It talks about the future of work and who's going to have jobs and who won't. It talks about the economic impact of that, which is a bit scary sort of stuff, but the reality of the knowledge workers, that are just paid for what's in their heads and being able to retrieve that or to look at a form and pick information out and put it into another form, those sorts of jobs are not going to be so much of the thing in the future. So what do we need to do about that? So we need to understand what are the digital aspirations of my business, because they're pretty much putting them out there now. I did some work for a Sydney university just recently, and they had a 2025 strategy. You'd read that and go, okay, it's more research-based, customer experience for the students, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so what does that mean for the service management capability? Right? It's not that hard to get that information about what the aspirations are. The execution of that sort of stuff is pretty hard. So how well prepared are we for that? And am I working in the system or on the system? It's a challenge for yourself. What is the, now, of course, you're not going to be doing 100% of one or the other, right? You're always going to, but sometimes you'll just be so overwhelmed by working in the system that you just don't have the time to work on the system. It's a nice aspiration. I'll get to it. I've got a sticky note related to that in a backlog. You know, it's about trying to get those things into balance so that I can actually do my job as a leader in the organisation, because that's essentially what you're paid for when you get to a certain level. Just the picking up and moving stuff around stuff and managing other people that are picking up stuff and moving it around, that's not so much what a leadership role is in the future. Not so much today either, but we do get a little bit overwhelmed. So what do we need to learn, and how can I lead to make this happen? What would my involvement be with the IoT initiative, with the DevOps initiative or continuous delivery? How might I take on some of those principles of SRE, talk to my ops people and figure out how we can work together to do a better job of availability management and managing the customer experience? And what I found quite interesting is that what we learn in ITSM it seems a little revolutionary when you go down to HR and say, I'm managing everything in email. Wow. And they are, right? And there's so much email and spreadsheet and all that sort of stuff. How can we help? What we know, because we've got a portal now, would you like us to put your services in the portal? Yeah? We'll organise the workflow, we'll measure it for you, we'll give you the notifications and business rules, we'll work on all of that together. That's actually very, very well received in the business these days. We're doing quite a bit of it with our customers, which is great fun. Okay, so I have to have a little plug at the end. We're delivering the DevOps training. IT for IT training is coming down the pipe. We're working with the tools to implement those. We're doing operating model uplift. So there's a lot of this work that we're hands-on with at the moment. I'm personally hands-on with a lot of it. So very, very keen to reflect on this and talk to senior leaders about this. And you know, I blog on this sort of stuff every now and then. The resources for the goats. There's so many books. It's sort of hard to pick favourites. If you haven't read The Lean Startup already, and you're wondering why the business talks about minimum viable products and those sorts of things, MVP comes from this book. It comes from the world of startup, but it gets even used in government these days. What's the minimum viable product that we need to put out there to a customer for them to know whether, or for us to know whether or not this is a useful thing for the customer? So each one of these books has got its own little value proposition. One of the latest books is by Charlie Betts, one of the lead authors of IT for IT. But this is a transformational book in how we should be teaching this sort of content to undergrads and graduates. Because at the moment in universities we're still teaching Project Management 101, SDLC, you name it, right? Not even teaching Agile in most of the universities at this stage. Charlie has resolved that. He's working in Minnesota State University on this sort of stuff. He's now a Forrester analyst, so he doesn't get so much time to do it, but that's a great book. Open Group, providing IT for IT Foundation training, that's coming soon. Not yet available in the Australian market from us. There might be a competitor out there or so. But the DevOps training already available from Ian's team. We deliver that in consultation or in collaboration with the HDAA. And if you haven't read Elon Musk's book on, well, in fact, it's Ashley Vance. It's an authorised biography. The thing that I really like about Musk that sort of gives me confidence in the idea of the operating model and the service portfolio at the centre of it, you have a look at the Tesla Roadster, the S, the X, the E that's coming, the Y, the truck, all of those things. He is reinventing the supply chain each time he brings out a new product. So the 3 is the mass market, right? So you're building giga factories for batteries all over the world. He's now scaled the model because that's what you need to hit the 100. He's already got hundreds of thousands of sales in the backlog. So you see this tight coupling between the product portfolio and the operating model that goes with it. And that's why I know that this is, you know, you see, there are many examples, Toyota, all sorts of examples you can find, where you look at the portfolio and the attributes of that and you organise the operating model to what's going on in the portfolio. Don't just look at the book and think about what to do next. Look at the attributes that you haven't satisfied of that service portfolio and what you're going to need to do for the future. Okay, so lots of great books to read. And I always like to encourage people, as leaders, improving our work is our work. That's our job. That's what we're supposed to be doing every day. When we get to a certain level of experience, that's what's expected of us in our organisation. And another book that I highly recommend, and it's a little bit of a mantra, obviously called Value Flow as a company. Don't go with the flow, be the flow. A lot of this, it's hard to take the first step because you don't know all the answers, and you can suffer from paralysis by analysis. Believing you don't have the support, believing you don't have all the answers, and not getting started. My encouragement to people is that, well, nobody knows all the answers. Nobody knows better than you, your environment. Nobody has your experience in your world the same way that you do. So you've got the advantage there, and your business needs that. So particularly with what's coming at us over the next few years. Okay, I don't have question time, unfortunately, but we've got a couple of hours worth of bar time, I think, on Ian's tab. So I suggest we take advantage of that. But I'll be around for questions over the next hour or so, and hopefully we can continue the discussion. So thanks very much for your attention.